Jake Morrison had been in some tight spots before, but being dragged through the pristine corridors of a Vortak Imperial dreadnought by two 7-foot-tall purple aliens with way too many teeth definitely made the top 10. The restraints around his wrists hummed with some kind of energy field that made his fingers tingle, and not in the good way. "You know," Jake said, his voice echoing off the polished metal walls, "when I woke up this morning, I really thought today was going to be boring. Thanks for proving me wrong, guys." The guards didn't respond. Apparently, the Vortek Empire didn't appreciate witty banter from their prisoners. Their loss, really. They hauled him into a circular chamber that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many old Earth sci-fi movies and thought, "You know what this torture room needs? More dramatic lighting." Curved walls stretched up into shadows, and in the center sat what could only be described as a very expensive dentist's chair with delusions of grandeur. But the real star of the show was the machine looming over the chair like a mechanical spider having an identity crisis. Crystalline components pulsed with soft blue light, connected by cables that seemed to move on their own. The whole thing hummed with an energy that made Jake's teeth ache. "Behold, human," announced a voice that sounded like it had been marinated in pompous sauce for about 3 decades. "The Truth Weaver." Jake turned to see a Vorthek in ornate robes approaching with the kind of swagger that suggested he'd practiced this entrance in the mirror. This one was taller than the guards, with elaborate scarification covering his purple skin and enough jewelry to open a small boutique. "I am Inquisitor Krelthak," the alien continued, "and I have the distinct pleasure of being the one who will extract every secret from your primitive human mind." "Oh, wow," Jake replied, letting his voice drip with enthusiasm. And here I was, worried this was going to be awkward. Nothing breaks the ice like a good old-fashioned mind probe. Krelthak's 4 eyes narrowed. "Your sarcasm will not serve you here, human. The Truth Weaver has been perfected over 10,000 years of Vorthak science. No being in the galaxy has ever successfully deceived it." "No being in the galaxy, huh?" Jake whistled low and impressed. "That's quite a track record. I'm genuinely curious now about what happens when you meet your first exception." The guards shoved him toward the chair, but Jake was already studying the machine with professional interest. As a smuggler, he'd encountered his share of security systems, and this one was definitely showing off. Too many unnecessary components, too much flash. In his experience, the most effective systems were usually the simplest ones. "The Truth Weaver," Krelthak explained as Jake was strapped into the chair, "operates on quantum principles your species couldn't possibly comprehend. It reads the very fabric of reality itself, detecting the microscopic fluctuations that occur when a sentient being attempts to deceive." "Quantum principles," Jake repeated, nodding seriously. "Right, and here I thought it was just a really fancy mood ring." The restraints clicked into place around his arms and legs, and Jake felt that familiar tingle of energy fields activating. The machine's humming grew louder, and those crystalline components began to pulse faster. "Your execution is scheduled for dawn," Krelthak said, adjusting something on a control panel. "But first, we will learn everything about your smuggling operation, your contacts, your routes. The Truth Weaver will strip away every lie, every deception, every clever word you've ever spoken." Jake tested the restraints experimentally. Solid. But then again, he'd never planned on breaking out through brute force anyway. "Every clever word, huh?" he said, grinning up at the machine. "Well, this should be fun." The Truth Weaver activated with a sound like 1,000 crystal bells being gently tortured. Jake felt a strange sensation wash over him, like someone was rifling through his thoughts with cold, mechanical fingers. The machine's blue glow intensified, and symbols he couldn't read began scrolling across displays around the chamber. "State your name," Krelthak commanded, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of someone who'd done this routine a few thousand times. "Jake Morrison," Jake replied honestly. No point in being difficult about the easy questions. The machine pulsed once, and a satisfied chime echoed through the chamber. A holographic display showed what looked like a green checkmark. "Excellent," Krelthak said, making notes on a tablet. "The Truth Weaver confirms your honesty. Now, are you guilty of smuggling contraband through Vorthak space?" Jake looked up at the crystalline spider looming over him, its components now spinning slowly in their housings. He could practically feel the quantum sensors focused on him, waiting to catch the slightest deviation from truth. "Oh, absolutely," he said with complete sincerity. "I'm the most law-abiding citizen in the galaxy. Haven't broken a single law in my entire life." The machine's humming changed pitch. The blue glow flickered, and then the symbols on the displays began scrolling faster, much faster. From somewhere behind the Truth Weaver, Jake heard a new voice mutter something that sounded like alien profanity. A shorter Vorthak in technician's robes rushed to one of the control panels, her movements quick and worried. "What is it, Black Zara?" Krelthak demanded. "The readings are unusual, Inquisitor," Blixara replied, her voice tight with confusion. "The Truth Weaver is detecting both truth and falsehood simultaneously. The quantum matrix is having difficulty processing the contradiction." Jake raised his eyebrows. "Huh, that's weird. Maybe your infallible machine isn't as infallible as advertised." "Impossible," Krelthak snapped. "The Truth Weaver cannot be deceived. Ask him again." "Very well," Blixara said, adjusting something on her control panel. "Human, are you engaged in illegal activities?" Jake considered this seriously. "Well, that depends on your definition of illegal, doesn't it? I mean, technically, breathing is illegal on about 47 different worlds in the Rigel system, so yes, I'm a hardened criminal. You caught me red-hand committing the heinous crime of respiratory function." The machine's humming became a high-pitched whine. The crystalline components began spinning faster, and Jake could swear he saw sparks jumping between some of the connections. "The quantum processors are overheating," Blixara reported, her voice climbing toward panic. "The Truth Weaver is attempting to resolve a logical paradox. His statement contains elements of truth wrapped in deliberate misdirection, but the pattern doesn't match any known deception methodology. Try a different approach," Krellikok ordered, but Jake could hear the first notes of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Human," Blixara said, "do you possess illegal cargo?" "Oh, tons of it," Jake replied cheerfully. "My ship is absolutely loaded with contraband. Forbidden literature, banned artwork, illegal spices. I've got a whole crate of completely unauthorized happiness in my cargo bay. The Vorthek Empire's most wanted smuggler." The Truth Weaver made a sound like a computer having a nervous breakdown. Warning lights began flashing around the chamber, and Jake felt the energy restraints fluctuate around his wrists. "This is impossible," Krelthok growled, striding over to examine the displays. "The machine reads truth in his words, but the context suggests deception. How can he be simultaneously honest and lying?" "Maybe," Jake suggested helpfully, "your super-advanced quantum lie detector has a tiny design flaw. Just a thought." Blixara was frantically adjusting controls now, her four hands moving in a blur across multiple panels. "Inquisitor, the Truth Weaver's neural networks are experiencing cascade failures. The quantum entanglement matrix is destabilizing." "Fix it," Krelthak snarled. "I'm trying, but the human's responses are creating feedback loops. Each answer generates more contradictions, and the system is attempting to resolve them all simultaneously." Jake watched smoke beginning to rise from some of the machine's components. "You know, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think your torture device might be broken." The Truth Weaver was now making sounds that definitely weren't in the manufacturer's manual. Warning alarms joined the chorus of mechanical distress, and Jake counted at least 3 different types of smoke rising from various components. "Perhaps," Krelthak said through gritted teeth, "we should try a more direct approach. Human, what is your occupation?" Jake pretended to think about this seriously. "Well, I'm a transportation logistics coordinator, specializing in discrete cargo management and alternative trade route optimization. I also dabble in interstellar tourism, showing people parts of the galaxy they've never seen before, usually because those parts are highly restricted." The machine's crystalline components began spinning so fast they looked like they were trying to escape velocity. The blue glow flickered between colors that probably didn't have names yet. "The quantum matrix is fragmenting," Blixara announced, her voice now reaching frequencies that might have been audible to dogs. "The Truth Weaver is attempting to process 17 different levels of meaning simultaneously." "Shut it down," Krelthok commanded. "I can't. The system won't respond to manual override. It's locked in a recursive analysis loop." Jake nodded sympathetically. "That's what happens when you try to overthink things. Sometimes the simple approach is best." "What is your ship's cargo manifest?" Krelthok demanded, apparently deciding to power through the technical difficulties. "Oh, you want the official manifest or the real one?" Jake asked brightly. "Because officially I'm carrying agricultural supplies, medical equipment, and educational materials. You know, boring stuff. Nothing that would interest the Vortak Empire at all." The Truth Weaver emitted a sound like a whale having an existential crisis. More warning lights activated, and Jake was pretty sure he could hear metal groaning somewhere in the machine's depths. "And unofficially," Krelthok pressed. "Unofficially, I'm the galaxy's most successful smuggler of hope, dreams, and actual freedom. I've got a whole cargo bay full of revolutionary ideas and banned books. My personal favorite is a complete collection of human comedy shows that would probably cause your entire government to collapse from laughing too hard." Sparks began cascading from the Truth Weaver's upper assemblies. The displays around the chamber were now showing what looked like abstract art created by a computer having a seizure. "This is impossible," Black Zara muttered, her hands moving desperately across emergency controls. "The Truth Weaver is designed to detect deception, not whatever this is." "The word you're looking for is sarcasm," Jake offered helpfully. "It's this amazing human invention, where you say one thing but mean something completely different. Revolutionary concept, I know." "Sarcasm?" Krelthok repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Yeah, it's like lying, but more entertaining. See, when I say I'm the most law-abiding citizen in the galaxy, I'm actually communicating that I'm absolutely not law-abiding at all. But technically every word I'm saying is true from a certain perspective." The machine made a noise like a garbage disposal eating a violin. More components began smoking, and Jake was reasonably certain he could smell burning quantum processors. "The neural networks are collapsing," Black Zara reported. "The Truth Weaver is trying to create new logical frameworks to handle the contradictions, but each framework immediately contradicts itself." "Try asking him something simple," Krelthok suggested, his voice betraying just a hint of desperation. "Human, what is your species called?" "We're called humans," Jake replied honestly, "though personally I prefer to think of us as the galaxy's most successful, accidental comedians. We've been perfecting the art of confusing authority figures for thousands of years." The Truth Weaver began displaying error messages in languages Jake didn't recognize. Then it started displaying error messages about the error messages. The smoke was getting thicker. "The cascade failure is spreading to the backup systems," Black Zara announced. "If this continues, the Truth Weaver network could experience total system collapse." "Network?" Jake asked, suddenly very interested. "This thing is connected to other machines?" "The Truth Weaver is linked to every interrogation facility in the Empire," Krelthok said absently. Then his eyes widened as he realized what he'd just revealed. Jake grinned. "Oh, this just keeps getting better. So when your supercomputer has its inevitable nervous breakdown, it's going to take out the entire Imperial truth detection grid?" "Shut him up," Krelthok ordered. "I'm trying, but the restraint systems are connected to the Truth Weaver's main processor," Black Zara replied. "If I shut down his speech centers, I might crash the entire system." "You know what?" Jake said conversationally. "I'm starting to think your empire might have some fundamental design flaws." The Truth Weaver was now producing a symphony of mechanical death rattles that would have made a junkyard weep. Sparks cascaded like angry fireflies, and the smell of burning quantum processors filled the chamber with an acrid haze that made Jake's eyes water. "Inquisitor!" Black Zara called out, her voice cracking with panic. "The Truth Weaver is approaching critical cascade failure. The quantum entanglement matrix is beginning to destabilize reality, fluctuations in a 12-meter radius." "What does that mean?" Krelthok demanded. "It means," Jake said cheerfully, "that your fancy torture machine is about to turn this entire section of your ship into a very expensive piece of abstract art." The machine's crystalline components were now spinning so fast they'd become blurs of light. The blue glow had shifted through the spectrum and was now a color that Jake was pretty sure wasn't supposed to exist. Warning klaxons added their voices to the chaos, and emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. "I don't understand," Krelthok growled, his 4 eyes fixed on the displays showing cascading system failures. "The Truth Weaver has processed millions of interrogations across 10,000 years. How can one human break something that has never failed?" Jake tested his restraints again. The energy fields were fluctuating wildly now, growing weaker with each surge of power from the dying machine. "Well," he said, "that's actually a really good question. See, the thing about your Truth Weaver is that it's designed to detect lies, right? But it operates on the assumption that beings either tell the truth or they don't. Binary thinking. Very logical." The machine emitted a sound like a freight train having an argument with a wind chime. More components began smoking, and Jake was pretty sure he could see actual flames dancing inside some of the crystal housings. "But humans," he continued, "we don't really do binary communication. We invented this wonderful thing called context. When I say I'm the most law-abiding citizen in the galaxy, I'm not lying. From my perspective, I follow all the laws that actually matter. It's just that my definition of laws that matter is a bit different from yours." "The quantum processors are overloading," Black Zara reported, her voice rising to a shriek. "The Truth Weaver is attempting to create new logical frameworks faster than the cooling systems can handle." "Here's the beautiful part," Jake said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a particularly elegant joke. Your machine is trying to determine whether I'm telling the truth or lying, but I'm doing both simultaneously. Every sarcastic statement I make is technically true while being contextually false. It's like a logic puzzle that eats itself. The Truth Weaver began displaying what looked like alien hieroglyphs having a seizure. The symbols scrolled faster and faster until they became a blur of meaningless patterns. You see, Jake continued, warming to his subject, sarcasm is humanity's greatest accidental weapon. We developed it because we're a species that loves to complain about everything while pretending we're not complaining. It's passive-aggressive. Communication, elevated to an art form. Impossible, Krelthax snarled, but his voice lacked conviction now. No form of communication can be simultaneously true and false. Oh, but it can, Jake said with genuine enthusiasm. Watch this. Your Truth Weaver is working perfectly. It's the most advanced piece of technology I've ever seen, and I'm absolutely terrified of its incredible capabilities. The machine's humming reached a pitch that made Jake's teeth ache. The crystalline components were now glowing so brightly they hurt to look at directly. Every word of that statement is true, Jake explained as sparks rained down around him. Your machine is working exactly as designed. It is advanced technology. I am impressed by its capabilities. But the way I said it communicates the exact opposite meaning. Your Truth Weaver is reading the literal truth of my words while completely missing the actual message. The neural networks are collapsing, Blixara announced, her voice barely audible over the mechanical screaming. The Truth Weaver is attempting to process infinite recursive loops of meaning. The thing is, Jake said, his voice almost conversational despite the chaos, your species never developed sarcasm, did you? You communicate directly, honestly, literally. It's actually pretty admirable. But it also means you built a lie detector that can't handle the one form of communication that's technically honest while being completely dishonest. The Truth Weaver made a sound like reality itself was clearing its throat. The emergency lighting flickered, and Jake felt his restraints weaken further. When I tell you I'm the galaxy's most successful smuggler of hope and dreams, he continued, I'm not lying. I do smuggle hope to people living under oppression. I do transport dreams in the form of banned books and forbidden art. Your machine reads that as truth, because it is truth. But it's also obviously sarcastic exaggeration which makes it a lie. Your poor Truth Weaver is trying to hold both concepts in its quantum brain at the same time. The machine's death throes were reaching a crescendo. Flames were now visible inside multiple components, and the smell of burning electronics was becoming overwhelming. Congratulations, Jake said, grinning through the smoke. You've just discovered humanity's secret superpower. We're so naturally sarcastic that we can break any truth detection system just by being ourselves. 10,000 years of Vorthok science, defeated by human snark. The Truth Weaver gave one final, mechanical scream, and then exploded in a spectacular display of sparks, flames, and very expensive quantum components, becoming very expensive quantum debris. The explosion took out the lights, the emergency systems, and Jake's restraints all at once. The interrogation chamber plunged into absolute darkness, the kind of black that made Jake wonder if his eyes were actually open. The silence that followed the Truth Weaver's demise lasted exactly 3 seconds before it was shattered by the most beautiful sound Jake had ever heard. The screaming of about 40 different alarm systems all having nervous breakdowns simultaneously. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red strobes that made the destroyed Truth Weaver look like a modern art installation titled Hubris and Consequences. Chunks of crystalline components lay scattered across the floor like the remains of a very expensive chandelier that had gotten into a fight with a grenade. What happened? Krelthok's voice cut through the chaos, pitched somewhere between rage and panic. Blixara, report! The Truth Weaver network is completely offline, came the technician's reply, though Jake couldn't see her in the strobing darkness. The cascade failure spread through the quantum entanglement matrix faster than the safety protocols could engage. Every Truth Weaver in the Imperial fleet just went dark, simultaneously. Jake stood up from the smoking ruins of his restraint chair, brushing quantum debris off his jacket. The energy fields that had held him were now just faint sparks dancing between his fingers. He had to admit, this was turning out to be a much more interesting day than he'd expected. The primary power grid is down, another voice shouted from somewhere near the entrance. Backup systems are failing. We're running on emergency power only. And the emergency power, Jake noted conversationally, doesn't seem to be doing a very good job. The chamber's blast doors, which had been sealed shut during the interrogation, were now flickering between locked and unlocked as their control systems tried to reboot. Each flicker was accompanied by a mechanical grinding sound, that suggested the doors were not happy about the situation. "Security teams to Interrogation Bay 7, Krelthok barked into his communicator. "We have a prisoner escape situation." Inquisitor," came the crackling reply. "Security is down on decks 4 through 12. The Truthweaver explosion knocked out the security grid, the life support monitoring systems, and apparently the artificial gravity generators on deck 6. Jake could hear distant crashes and shouts echoing through the ship's corridors. The emergency lighting cast moving shadows that made everything look like a badly choreographed dance of confusion. "You know," he said, stepping carefully around a piece of twisted metal that had probably cost more than most planets' annual budgets. "I'm starting to think your empire might want to consider some redundancy in its critical systems." "Seize him!" Krelthak roared, but his voice was already moving away, toward the malfunctioning blast doors. Jake heard the distinctive sound of large alien feet trying to navigate debris in the dark, followed by what he was pretty sure was Vorthak profanity. Someone had definitely just tripped over a piece of the Truthweaver's remains. The emergency lighting flickered again, and in the brief moment of darkness Jake heard the satisfying sound of more collision-based alien vocabulary. When the lights came back, he could see the two guards from earlier stumbling around like they were trying to navigate a minefield while wearing blindfolds. "The internal navigation system is down," one of them reported, his voice muffled by what sounded like a face full of floor. "Corridor mapping is offline. We're basically flying blind." "Literally flying blind," Jake corrected helpfully. "The artificial gravity is out too, remember? On deck 6, anyway." He picked his way carefully toward what he hoped was the exit, following the sound of increasingly frantic alien voices. The ship's intercom crackled to life, delivering what sounded like a very stressed announcement in the Vorthak language. Jake didn't speak Vorthak, but he was pretty sure the general message was something along the lines of "Please remain calm while everything falls apart." "The hangar bay control systems are offline," someone was shouting in the distance. "Ship launches are suspended until we can restore primary power." Jake paused mid-step. That was definitely information he needed to know. He might be free of his restraints, but he was still stuck on a Vorthak dreadnought in the middle of enemy space. Without a ship, this escape was going to be very brief and very pointless. "Of course," he muttered to himself, "it couldn't be that easy." Behind him, he could hear Krelthak issuing increasingly desperate orders. "Get manual override tools, break down the blast doors if you have to, find that human before he reaches the hangar bay." Jake grinned in the darkness. "Too late for that, boys." The blast doors chose that moment to give up their electronic struggle and grind open with a sound like metal teeth being extracted without anesthesia. Emergency lighting from the corridor beyond spilled into the chamber, revealing the full extent of the Truthweaver's spectacular suicide. The machine had taken out most of the chamber's walls when it exploded, and sparks were still dancing between exposed power conduits. "Well," Jake said, stepping into the corridor, "this has been absolutely delightful. Thanks for the hospitality, but I think it's time I showed myself out." The corridor was a maze of flashing lights and confused Vorthak crew members stumbling around with the coordination of a bag of dropped hammers. Jake walked among them with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there, just another figure in the chaos. "Excuse me," he said to a passing technician. "Which way to the hangar bay?" The technician, clearly overwhelmed by the crisis, pointed down the corridor without thinking. "Section C, Deck 4. But all launches are suspended due to the power grid failure." "Thanks," Jake said cheerfully. "I'm sure it'll work out." He strolled down the corridor, listening to the increasingly frantic reports crackling over the ship's communication system. The Truthweaver explosion had apparently done more than just knock out the interrogation systems. It had cascaded through the ship's entire network, taking out everything from navigation to food replicators. "You know," he said to himself as he walked, "I really should write a thank you note to whoever designed that feedback loop. This is working out better than I could have hoped." Behind him, the sounds of the search were growing more distant and more disorganized. Jake whistled a cheerful tune as he made his way toward the hangar bay, already planning his next move. After all, suspended launches were more of a guideline than a rule, especially when you had a talent for creative problem-solving. And Jake Morrison had always been very, very creative. The hangar bay was a monument to organized chaos. Emergency lighting cast everything in that familiar hellish red glow, and Jake could see dozens of Vorthak crew members running around like purple ants whose hill had just been kicked by a giant boot. Ships sat in their docking cradles like sleeping metal beasts, their running lights dark thanks to the power grid failure. "Perfect," Jake muttered, surveying the scene. Nothing I love more than stealing a spaceship in the middle of a crisis. He spotted his target immediately, a sleek Vortac scout ship sitting in the nearest docking bay. It was smaller than the military vessels, which meant it probably had independent power systems. More importantly, it was close to the hangar's atmospheric barrier, which meant a shorter distance to freedom. Jake walked toward the ship with the confident stride of someone who absolutely belonged there. The key to successful infiltration, he'd learned, was to act like you were supposed to be doing whatever you were doing. "You there," a voice called out behind him. "This area is restricted during emergency protocols." Jake turned to see a Vortac officer approaching, his uniform crisp despite the chaos around them. The alien's 4 eyes were focused on Jake with the kind of attention that suggested he might actually be competent. "Oh, absolutely," Jake replied without missing a beat. "I'm here on direct orders from Inquisitor Krelthak to conduct an emergency inspection of the scout vessel's quantum containment systems. Standard procedure after a Truthweaver cascade failure." The officer's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't aware that Truthweaver failures affected ship containment systems." "Well," Jake said with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious, "when you have a quantum entanglement matrix explosion, the resonance waves can destabilize any nearby containment fields. Basic physics, really. The Inquisitor was very concerned about potential secondary failures." The officer hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Jake could practically see the thoughts running through his head. This human was supposed to be a prisoner, but he was also speaking with technical authority about systems the officer didn't fully understand. And everything was falling apart anyway. "I'll need to verify this with the Inquisitor," the officer said finally. "Of course," Jake agreed. "Good thinking. I'm sure he's not at all busy right now dealing with the complete collapse of the ship's primary systems. I'll just wait here by the ship while you go find him in the chaos." The officer's communicator crackled to life. "All hands, priority alert. Prisoner escape in progress. Human subject Jake Morrison is considered extremely dangerous and may have caused the Truthweaver network failure. Approach with extreme caution." Jake blinked. "Wow. Extremely dangerous. I'm flattered." The officer's hand moved toward his weapon, but Jake was already moving. Years of running from various forms of authority had given him excellent reflexes, and he dove behind a maintenance cart just as the energy blast scorched the air where he'd been standing. Jake called out from behind cover, "I really appreciate the extremely dangerous part, but I think caused is a bit strong. I prefer contributed to the Truthweaver failure. I'm humble that way." More energy blasts answered him, and Jake could hear the officer shouting for backup. The sounds of running feet echoed through the hangar bay as security teams finally started getting organized. Jake rolled out from behind the cart and sprinted toward the scout ship. The boarding ramp was down, thank the universe for small favors. He could hear shouts behind him, but he was already at the ship's entrance. "Stop," someone yelled. "The launch systems are offline." "Are they?" Jake called back, disappearing into the ship. "That's terrible news. I sure hope I don't figure out how to bypass them." The scout ship's interior was typical Vorthak design, efficient, clean, and completely lacking in personality. Jake slid into the pilot's seat and began examining the control systems. The ship had independent power, just as he'd hoped, but the hangar bay's launch control systems were indeed offline. "Computer," he said, "activate manual launch sequence." "Manual launch sequence requires authorization from hangar control," the ship's computer replied in a pleasant female voice. "Well, that's inconvenient," Jake muttered. Then his face brightened. "Computer, this is an emergency situation. I am authorized by Inquisitor Krelthak to conduct an emergency launch to prevent potential quantum contamination of the hangar bay. Please provide authorization code." Jake thought for a moment. "The authorization code is extremely dangerous, prisoner escape protocol Alpha." Also, the Inquisitor said please. Authorization code not recognized. Jake studied the control panel. "Computer, what would happen if I just manually override the launch sequence myself?" "Manual override would result in immediate launch without hangar control clearance. This action would be considered theft of Imperial property." "Right. And if I don't override it?" "Current security protocols indicate you will be captured and executed." Jake grinned. "Well, when you put it that way, theft seems like the more attractive option." He began working on the control panel, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Outside, he could hear the sounds of security teams surrounding the ship, but the boarding ramp was already sealed and locked. "Computer, begin engine startup sequence." Engine startup initiated. "Warning, hangar bay doors are sealed." "That's what the big red button marked emergency door override is for," Jake said, reaching for the control. The hangar bay doors began grinding open, revealing the star-filled void beyond. Jake felt the familiar thrill of impending escape, the rush that came with successfully pulling off something that should have been impossible. Computer, open a ship-wide communication channel. Channel open. Jake cleared his throat. Attention, crew of the Vorthak Imperial Dreadnought. This is Jake Morrison, your extremely dangerous prisoner. I wanted to thank you for your hospitality, and let you know that I'm borrowing one of your ships. Don't worry, I'll take good care of it. He paused, then continued with obvious satisfaction. I also wanted to let you know that the Truthweaver network failure wasn't actually caused by any exotic technology or advanced human weapons. It was destroyed by something we call sarcasm. It's a form of communication where we say one thing but mean another. And apparently, your super-advanced quantum computers can't handle it. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Jake felt the familiar vibration of a spacecraft preparing for launch. The thing is, he continued, every human learned sarcasm as a child. It's how we communicate with authority figures, express frustration, and generally make life more interesting. So congratulations, Vorthak Empire. You've just discovered that your entire interrogation system can be defeated by any human with a decent sense of humor. Jake engaged the launch sequence and the scout ship lifted smoothly away from the docking cradle. This is Jake Morrison, signing off. Thanks for the ship, and remember, if you ever want to build a better lie detector, maybe don't make it so literal-minded. A little sarcasm detection might go a long way. He cut the communication channel and guided the ship out of the hangar bay, watching the massive dreadnought fall away behind him. The stars stretched out ahead, infinite and welcoming. Computer, set course for the nearest human settlement. Course plotted, estimated travel time, 47 hours. Jake leaned back in the pilot's seat, still grinning. You know, computer, I think this might be the start of a beautiful friendship. Just a heads up, though, I'm extremely sarcastic. Try not to have a nervous breakdown about it. Noted, the computer replied. I will adjust my interpretation protocols accordingly. See, Jake said, settling in for the journey. Now that's what I call adaptive technology. Behind him, the Vorthak Dreadnought was probably dealing with the aftermath of the first successful escape from their supposedly inescapable Truthweaver interrogation system. Ahead of him lay freedom, adventure, and the satisfaction of knowing that he'd just accidentally given humanity a new reputation as the species that could break any lie detector, just by being themselves. Not bad for a day's work, really. Not bad at all.